VikesNow, Dustin Baker. We are 2 days before the start of the regular season. Packers-Vikings. The Packers are favored by 1.5 in the Vikings building. But last night, an apropos topic is we got to experience live regular season action as the Bills slaughtered the Los Angeles Rams in their building. And, home field evidently doesn't matter out there. It's loud as hell for the Bills. Still bizarre to this day. It's kind of like that Chargers game in 2019 when Afadi Adembo had the touchdown, and it basically felt like a Vikings home game. Same shit happened last night with the Bills and Rams, which fine by me. But it brought to mind a topic which you're going to discuss here, and because I'm spiffy, I put up some numbers here, and these stats, the last 50 starts between Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins, don't account for last night. Stafford, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and used my tweet from January, I guess the end of the regular season. So these would be even more, there'd be more variance in a bad way for Stafford because of last night's turd that he authored against the Bills. But we're going to talk about the perspective of Stafford and Cousins because it's very appropriate in light of last night's game. And I hope that you'll kind of understand where I'm coming from about the Stafford and Cousins connection by the end of these 15 minutes. So let's get it out there one more time. Stafford looked like shit last night, plain and simple. He had one of those bad Cousins games. You know how at least once per year, maybe in one game plus the first half of another, Kirk Cousins looks like an imbecile? The Stafford had that game last night. It was just nasty for him because it was in front of a national audience, the opening salvo of the 2022 season, Super Bowl champs, and he looked like garbage. So that's what he quintessentially had one of those Cousins games that you might recall against the Colts in 2020, and I think that same season, the Falcons a couple weeks later, where he just doesn't look like a real quarterback. Stafford has those games too. You're going to see a theme of my discussion here, the parallels between Stafford and Cousins, and it's those strange games where you're like, what is this? Stafford has those too. You saw it last night on NBC if you watched the game. So before joining the Rams, according to how the world views quarterbacks' wins and quarterbacks' losses, Stafford was a habitual loser in Detroit. There's no other way to slice it. Thankfully, for his sake, everybody still loved him, and they blamed the organization. They didn't blame him. We only do that for certain quarterbacks, but he flat out was 74, 90, and 1 as a member of the Detroit Lions for, my goodness, 12 seasons, I think it was. And I've said this on the show before, but I'll say it until I perish, that I never once feared Matthew Stafford as the quarterback of the Detroit Lions against the Vikings, nor with the Rams for that matter. I do not look on the other side of the depth chart or the field and be like, oh, God, we're going up against Stafford. Whereas, obviously, you do that. I do that against Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson, who always beats the Vikings, except for last year. You certifiably do that. But Stafford, I have never, ever had those butterflies in my stomach going up against him. Why? Because he has games like last night. And I think that's how the world views Kirk Cousins, in that, not too formidable, ain't gonna slice and dice you. He's pretty good, but not a killer, not an elite crust of quarterback. Doesn't belong there. So I think it's a well-established notion that Stafford underwhelmed in Detroit. Poor guy. The team never did anything good around him except have one of the best wide receivers of all time, Calvin Johnson. Doesn't matter, evidently. But dropping Stafford in Los Angeles for a single year changed everything because you had a Hollywood Squares roster. I'll probably not even get them all as I name drop them. Von Miller, Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald. And then you put Stafford right in that, and you start to wonder, of course, they better at least get to the Super Bowl and win the damn thing. When you have that much perennial Hall of Fame talent, you're doing something wrong if you don't get to or win a Super Bowl. And they obviously did both. But everything changed when he went to a star-studded Olympic 1992 Dream Team-like roster filled with guys that you put on billboards and market because their talents are so scintillating. But I remain convinced, and this is where you probably think I'm nuts, that if you drop Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, and of course Stafford into Los Angeles, boom, all of those quarterbacks will do the same thing that Stafford did and bring them to the promised land. They're all in that special category of not like Mahomes or Brady, but not like Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz. They're right there. They're squished. And I think for the young players like Kyler Murray, you're at a pinch or a pivot point where you try to figure out, all right, is this guy going to be like Aaron Rodgers, or is he just going to kind of always resemble Dak Prescott, who by the way is entering his 7th season? Prescott, that is. So I will forever, I'll say Cousins, Carr, Prescott. If they were the quarterback of the 2021 Rams, they would have won the Super Bowl. Now, I can't prove that. All I can do is have my little theory. And even last night during the game, when Stafford was on his bullshit and he had the goofy turnovers, getting sacked like crazy, I think Mike Tirico even said he's good for one or two of those types of decisions per game. And it reminded me of how I used to feel about Case Keenum during the 2017 season. It was like a playground quarterback. There was always going to be one throw per game where you're like, oh God, and then you would fall and hit the ground incomplete because everything was so storybook about that season until the final game. And I think Stafford kind of has that same mentality where it's just lovable, gunslinging. Let's throw the ball. If you get some picks, so what, baby? It really reminded me on display last night, because it was the first game back of the season, that Stafford has those Keenum and Favre-like tendencies where you just fling it and hope for the best, and if it's intercepted, aw shucks, we still love you. And Tirico even pointed out he has one or two of those per game, and I don't quite know that Josh Allen has those or Rodgers. They're safer, but they're also better, and that's why they get in the top 5 category. And for me, Stafford does not. And I'll probably say it ad nauseum for the rest of these 10 minutes. Stafford is very good. He's damn good, like Kirk Cousins, but he is not a mercenary. He just isn't. He has to have the flow of a defense, an offensive line, which was awesome last year for the Rams, not good last night, to be successful. Who does that sound like? This is what Cousins is criticized for, needing everything around him to be perfect, which is false. It just needs to be not shit for him to thrive. I put the stats on the board here, so just calling those out. This is the last 50 starts, sans Stafford's last night because I didn't update them. But proof is in the pudding. 100 touchdowns for Cousins in the last 50 starts, 93 for Stafford. Stafford has more interceptions. Cousins has fewer. And then the passer rating, which I know is antiquated, but it still tells a reasonable story. You just want to look at other metrics in addition, like PFF or the EPA or DVOA. Passer rating is still a decent baseline to figure out if he's throwing picks, interceptions, completion percentage, and Cousin, wipes him off the map by 7-8 points there. So in the last 50 starts, statistically, unless you just look at these stats and say, I don't believe them, don't show me any proof, I don't want any of that, Cousins has statistically been superior the last 50 starts. But good for Stafford for playing for the Rams and getting the Super Bowl. Stafford is exactly like Cousins in that they're not quite elite, but they're damn good. They're interchangeable. And I think there's a stark difference between getting to the next level of Mahomes and Brady and Rodgers and living where they do. Now, the quarterback market always mandates that they're going to get 35, 40 million a year because that's how it goes now. But there's a reason that Cousins is at 35 million per season, whatever Stafford's at. It's separated by the Mahomeses, the Russell Wilsons now, and the Rodgers because there's a clear distinction between the caliber of play. And Stafford, as a standalone human being, proves why the quarterback wins statistic is bogus. Because in Detroit, when he was 74, 90, and 1, most people didn't be like, oh, that guy sucks. He's a loser. They didn't feel that way. They always felt bad for him. And if you want to interpret quarterback record or quarterback wins strictly the way that you should interpret a statistic mathematically, then Mitchell Trubisky is a better starting quarterback than Matthew Stafford. Mitchell Trubisky is a better starting quarterback than Deshaun Watson. If you're a quarterback wins guy or gal, that's the way it is. Now, to get over that, people assign a criteria like, well, it only really works after 100 starts. And nobody's ever explained to me how that shakes down. Like, oh, math is good at a certain threshold. No, that's not how it works. So I think quarterback wins. Matthew Stafford embodies the way the statistic is strange, because when you cite his quarterback record, which is still a losing record, people are like, I don't know. Not with Stafford. Just stick to the touchdown passes and the vibes, please. But of course, the Super Bowl changed everything for him, rightfully so. It got him the ring, and now he'll probably be a Hall of Famer because of that game. I think voters were slovenly craving a reason to get him into the Hall of Fame because they love him so much, and they got it last year. So kudos to him for not messing up a good thing with a fabulous Rams roster. I think there's also the butterfly effect too. There was the NFC Championship where Stafford threw the pass that was dropped by Jaquiski Tart, and I don't know if it's called out enough that if that guy doesn't drop that pass, the Rams season is kaput, and it's the 49ers heading to the Super Bowl for a showdown with the Bengals. So it just kind of shows you how, game of inches type stuff, even though that's a extreme cliche, it really matters. The Rams were this close, like a guy not dropping the ball to not going to the Super Bowl at all. And that kind of separates, is Stafford elite or is he good? Because thankfully, some dude dropped the ball and it allowed him to be catapulted to the Super Bowl. They won the thing because he had indeed a clutch fourth quarter with Cooper Kupp in tow, and they won the damn thing. I think a simple test as a fan of the Vikings, or pretty much a fan of anybody else, is that and with 3 or 4 minutes left in a game, that if Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson gets the football and they're down by 6 points or less, that you are in trouble. If you're watching the Vikings versus Rodgers, Mahomes, or Wilson, they're going to beat you. At least it feels that way. Now, I know they don't do it every single time. The numbers prove that as well. But just like when we watched that AFC divisional game between Mahomes and Allen last January, they were just trading haymakers, and you knew the other guy was going to come down and score. That does not apply for me with Stafford, and it doesn't even apply for Cousins. That's why they're separated. It's like you have this hopeful, like, all right, this is going to be the time that Stafford does it, or Cousins is going to bootstrap levitate the Vikings to a victory here. But it doesn't have that guaranteed mentality that is provided by Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell Wilson. And I think that distinction is what separates Stafford and Cousins from Mahomes and Rodgers. You can pick whatever poison you want, Brady, Russell Wilson. I think, broadly speaking, I had a show on this back in June, I think, but with Kirk Cousins' statistical output last year, the 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, in a season where they tied the record for most games decided by 8 or fewer points. Almost every single Vikings game was close. Therefore, there was no garbage time. Cousins throwing 33 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. We have this mentality, Vikings fans are like, no, not good enough. We were 8-9. And you end it there at the quarterback. You don't have the wherewithal, the nuance, the context to go examine what else might have been the problem. Because it is not an accident that a quarterback throws 33 touchdowns and 7 interceptions in a season without garbage time. We should champion that. He should have been given sympathy himself, a Staffordian sympathy that said, like, God, look what we squandered here. Look at this situational defense that fell apart in the final 2 minutes of games. We had a quarterback author a fabulous season, 33 touchdowns, 7 picks. But instead, what we do as fans and some pundits in the Minneapolis market is say, he's the one guy where a stat line like that doesn't do it for me. Ask yourself, why do we think that? We don't apply this standard to anybody else. I'm here to report that 33 touchdowns and 7 picks in a garbage time-less season does not grow on trees. If Kellen Mond somehow did that, we would build the statue. But when Cousins does it, it's a collective, like, we were 8-9, so I don't care. You shouldn't examine it from that lens. You should figure out why they actually went 8-9. And you're going to find that the quarterback probably wasn't the problem. And you want to know how I'm right? It's because a new general manager and head coach arrived on the scene, evaluated the situation, and said, we want that quarterback. We think we can win with them. If they thought, if they agreed with some of you, it was like, oh, he's a piece of shit that is a 59-2 quarterback record, they would have traded him to the Panthers or somewhere. But nope, they're convinced that they can make this work, kind of like O'Connell did with Stafford last year. So that's the vision. So I'll leave you with the numbers over here. Take one more glance. They're somewhere buried on my Twitter feed. But the Stafford and Cousins are not worlds apart. And I know we just spent a summer praising Stafford because they won a Super Bowl. But last night was a vivid example of the Stafford experience. He has awful games, just like some folks in the Cousins, Derek Carr, Dak Prescott tier indeed do. But for some strange reason with Stafford, we always gloss over it. And we're like, no, I don't want to talk about that, because he's just so lovable. It's very odd. So I won't be back with you guys until the end of Vikings-Packers, which for our show, it'll probably be Monday. So you bet your ass we'll recap what happened there. Hopefully we're talking about a triumph over Green Bay, because otherwise then we're going to have to draw back all of our expectations if they lose at home to the Packers and figure out, was it a close game? Was the head coach not ready? Did Cousins have one of those Stafford turd games? But we will discuss it on Monday, and skol, baby.